Okay, so in Railjack, the Warframe that you bring dictates an ability that the Railjack can also use on top of the abilities that it already has. Let me explain. Here we are in free space with the Catherine Gaza and my Wisp, so in order to actually access its abilities in the first place, you're going to need to use the tactical menu. And the tactical menu, of course, is available currently at Tactical Intrinsics level 1, although I suspect that's going to change very, very soon. Now, in the tactical menu, of course, you do have your tactical map, and of course your tactical avionics if you happen to be using any. And then you also have the ability. In this case, it's going to be Breach Surge for Wisp, because Wisp gives us Breach Surge. That's also really, really good. Now, how you use them is very simple. You click it, you find somewhere on the tactical map to put it on. In this case, we're going to put it somewhere that we can actually see. And voila, Breach Surge has been used. Now, in this case, the Breach Surge that we just used doesn't actually use our Warframe energy, it actually uses our Railjack energy. So all of the abilities that are available on the Railjack, depending on which Warframe that you bring, or which Warframe your allies bring, they will be consuming flux energy instead of regular energy. So there are, of course, some really interesting tactical ideas to use when it comes to using these abilities. Now, the big thing to keep in mind is that these abilities are still affected by things like power strength, power range, power duration, and power efficiency. So building your Warframe smartly, correctly, is also going to be important when using these abilities on your Railjack so that you can actually keep them in line with what you would normally expect from these abilities. Otherwise, when you come across a Railjack team that has 4 different Warframes, you will find a Railjack that has 4 different abilities, so that is of course really, really good. Whereas if you have a team that has, say, 2 duplicate Warframes, you may come across some slight differences between each ability, but unfortunately they will be ostensibly the same thing. So I would probably recommend setting up a rainbow team instead of a duplicate team for Railjack purposes. Another thing to keep in mind as well is that when it comes to the Helminth, if you happen to add a Helminth ability that happens to be a Railjack ability as well, unfortunately that will not override the ability that your Warframe will be providing for your Railjack. And simultaneously, if you happen to remove the Railjack ability from your Warframe, the Railjack will not be able to find an ability to add into its arsenal, and at that point it will basically register as an ability not found. That is a 404 error, and I would highly recommend against that for Railjack purposes. So, without further ado, let's get into the top 10, allegedly, Warframes that I would recommend bringing for the purpose of using a Railjack ability. Now, that being said though, if your favorite Warframe was not part of this list, rest assured it's not because they're bad in any way, shape or form, because just about every single one of the abilities that each Warframe brings, aside from maybe a handful, maybe 3, are very, very useful. So of course it is kind of difficult to determine which one really is the best. If you can make a case for your favorite Warframe's ability, then of course you're probably in the right idea. So without further ado, let's get into the list. Number 10. For number 10, we're going to start off with Lavos's Catalyze ability. So Catalyze being his 4th ability, being his ultimate ability. Catalyze is one of the abilities that a Railjack can use that doesn't actually use any flux energy, especially because Lavos himself doesn't use energy as well. This ability deals damage to enemies who are near the point of activation, and it also does extra damage to enemies who are affected by status procs. This ability actually doesn't have a cooldown, despite the fact that Lavos is the cooldown Warframe, but keep in mind you actually can't spam the ability while it is still technically active. So it doesn't exactly have a 30-second cooldown, but you'll probably want to think of it as having maybe a 5-second cooldown. You could potentially use this ability as a support ability for yourself as a Lavos player, i.e. you coat a bunch of enemies in status procs using your other abilities, you then proceed to use both your own Catalyze and the Railjack's Catalyze, and then after doing that a bunch of times, rough it, and that's really, really good. Number 9. For number 9, we're going to be looking at Volban, who brings along Photon Strike. Photon Strike is one of the few abilities that you can use on a Railjack that are specifically damage abilities, just like Lavos' Catalyze ability. Now, Photon Strike deals damage that scales with enemy level, and that damage of course is in AoE. Unfortunately though, when it comes to Photon Strike, it does deal with elevation problems. So for example, if you're standing a level above someone, and you use Photon Strike, you won't hit them because there's going to be a floor between you and them. So just keep that in mind when you want to use something like Photon Strike. Now, enemy armor will massively reduce the damage of Photon Strike, and Sentients can generally shrug it off pretty easily, just like a normal Photon Strike. This is why this ability is still relatively low on my list, but at the same time it is going to continue to be on my list because I get the feeling that against Corpus enemies in the upcoming Corpus Railjack update, Photon Strike is going to do a lot more damage and is going to therefore be a lot more meaningful as a support ability for your allies. So being able to call down a sky beam from the sky quite literally with the power of Photon Strike is going to be very, very interesting to use. Photon Strike is probably best used for defensive purposes against enemy borders, as they are generally clumped up when they first arrive on the ship. If you're going up against enemies in, say, an objective though, they tend to be spread out to the point where Photon Strike is a little bit more difficult to use. So obviously if your ally has some way of clumping enemies together, for example if they're playing Korra and they're using Ensnare, then you can coordinate either with the Korra player, or the Korra player can coordinate with themselves by ensnaring an enemy and then calling the power of the Photon Strike through the same tactical menu that they may have access to as well. Number 8. The next three on the list are pretty similar. They're going to be hard stuns. All three of these abilities can be used in a variety of situations, not just to deal with enemy borders. You can use them to support your allies during objectives as well. For number 8, we're going to be looking at Limbo, who brings Cataclysm. Cataclysm is a special case. It places everyone in the area into the Rift, which does mean you get to give your allies some energy regeneration if they happen to be inside the Rift. The Limbo player can then put all of those enemies into stasis if they are within the Cataclysm. Using stasis does not actually require you to be within range of the Cataclysm in any way, shape or form. So for example, if you are in the Railjack and your ally is in an objective, you can actually then drop a Cataclysm remotely into the objective and then activate stasis in order to keep all those enemies who happen to be in the Cataclysm in stasis. So that is really, really strong. The Wikipedia page states that the hull breaches inside a Cataclysm have their timer stopped. I tried this, it doesn't work, so either the information is just straight up incorrect or it is no longer the case. So just keep that in mind if you decide to use Cataclysm for that purpose. It won't work. Number 7. So for number 7, we're going to be looking at Rhino, who gives Rhino Stomp. So Rhino Stomp, of course, being yet another ultimate ability that is available for Railjack, in much the same way that Limbo's Cataclysm is an ultimate ability. Rhino Stomp is an ability that causes enemies to be suspended in the air, i.e. you're looking at a radial hard stun. Now this particular radial hard stun seems to be really, really effective even when it comes to things like elevation problems, as far as I can tell at least. So hopefully this is really, really good for dealing with enemy borders, for example, and definitely, like all hard stuns, this will prevent enemies inside your ship from starting fires. You can also use this to prevent enemies who are inside an objective from potentially harassing your ally who is trying to do something in the objective, or yourself if you happen to be in the objective, so that is of course a really useful option. Number 6. So for number 6, I've decided to put in Nidus, who gives us Lava. Lava, of course, is the ability that grabs enemies together and clumps them into a ball. The great thing about Lava is, of course, because you're using it as part of the Railjack ability, if you happen to be Nidus yourself, you can then drop a second Lava if for whatever reason the first Lava isn't working for you. Unfortunately, though, you will need to wait for the first Lava to basically disappear before you can use the tactical menu to activate your second Lava. So just keep that in mind. But generally speaking, Lava is pretty easy to make disappear if you happen to kill everyone who is being attached to the Lava at the present moment. At that point, you can then use your second one. One thing to also note as well is that Lava has a 25 flux base cost, which of course is then affected by various things such as the tactical intrinsics or your own Warframe's efficiency. So because of that, I've decided to put Lava on the list as opposed to something similar like Ensnare, which currently has a 50 flux base cost, so that's not going to be an ability that I put on the list. Okay, moving on. Number 5. For number 5, it's going to be Mesa, who brings along Shatter Shield. Now, Shatter Shield is an ability that reduces enemy gun damage that is incoming by a massive amount. The amount that is at base is 80%, but you can pretty much guarantee that every Mesa player in the universe will have more than just an intensifier on their build, so you can reliably say that Shatter Shield will be giving you the full 95% damage reduction cap that is part of Shatter Shield itself. This effectively makes everyone super duper tanky if they happen to be hit by Shatter Shield, which does mean it's great for supporting an ally in doing objectives. But notice that I only said ally, not allies. Unfortunately, when you're using Shatter Shield as part of a Railjack ability, it's not going to be an AoE ability, it's only going to affect one target at any given point in time. And at that point, you can't use Shatter Shield again until the initial Shatter Shield has expired. Number 4. So for number 4, we're going to be looking at Mag, who brings Magnetize. Magnetize, of course, is the ability that clumps enemies together whilst increasing the damage that you deal to them, among other things. Just like regular Magnetize, the Railjack Magnetize will require a target, but it can just be a target on the tactical map, so that's absolutely perfectly fine. The Railjack Magnetize will also explode in a final burst after the duration expires, but like I said, you can't use augments, so you have to wait for the actual bubble to explode by itself in a natural sense. And in similar fashion, the damage dealt by the explosion will be based on how much damage was inputted into the bubble in the first place. Magnetize is both useful in defensive scenarios, i.e. against borders, and also offensive scenarios such as doing objectives. So I highly recommend bringing a Mag along for your Railjack team. Number 3. For number 3, we're going to be looking at Harrow, who brings along Covenant. Covenant, of course, being his ultimate ability, is the ability that first makes allies invulnerable for a brief moment in time before giving them a huge flat crit chance boost. Now, unlike regular Covenant, which has a range based on your affinity range, the Covenant from the Railjack will have a very large but very noticeable actual range, so just keep that in mind. Covenant does make for a far more offensive support ability for the Railjack, definitely useful for objectives such as the Galleon Captain, but you can also use this in a defensive manner in much the same way you should use all offensive abilities in a defensive manner. Some coordination between your allies is probably necessary if you want to let them know that Covenant is in play, that way they can adjust their tactics to use the full value of that Covenant. Number 2. So for number 2, we're going to be looking at Protea, who brings along Dispensary. In much the same way that it is absolutely insane that Dispensary is available via the Helmet, it's also pretty insane that it's available via the use of the Railjack. You can actually drop a Dispensary anywhere on the map. So long as you have someone in an objective, you can also drop a Dispensary anywhere in the objective area. That is absolutely perfectly fine. So this ability is, and always will be, free energy and healing orbs. Feel free to use alongside Equilibrium if you wish. Before we look at the most useful, allegedly, Warframe to bring in Railjack, a few honorable mentions. Garuda brings along Blood Altar, which of course can be a very decent source of healing. Goss brings along Thermal Sunder that can be used twice to freeze enemies. Unfortunately, the heat version of it does not exist, therefore the blast and the armor strip does not really exist. Ember brings along Fire Blast, which of course basically means some good old-fashioned armor stripping. And Trinity's Energy Vampire is Energy Vampire. Yeah, someone somewhere decided that Trinity will be bringing Energy Vampire. And so we come to the best, allegedly, Warframe to bring to Railjack. Number 1. For number 1, we're going to be looking at Wukong, who brings along a Celestial Twin. The Celestial Twin, of course, being the clone of the Wukong player, undergoes the standard Celestial Twin logic. If the player is using a gun, the twin will use a sword. If the player is using a sword, the twin will use a gun. This allows the Wukong player to actually have 2 twins. That's right, by using the Celestial Twin ability via your Raojack and then using your own Celestial ability, you can actually have 3 Wukongs out on the field at any given point in time. Now, it seems like the twin will follow the closest player to its point of activation. So for example, if you activate Celestial Twin near your ally, the twin will then forevermore follow your ally. But if you activate Celestial Twin near yourself as a Wukong player, that twin will forevermore follow you. Unfortunately, the Raojack's twin will not activate Defy when the player uses Defy. You could probably then infer that it is not affected by Cloudwalker either if you happen to be using that. So at some point, the Raojack's Celestial Twin will die, and at that point you just basically use the Raojack to activate another Celestial Twin. Now keep in mind that only 1 extra Celestial Twin can be active at any given point in time. So for example, if you have 2 Wukongs in your team, you can only use 1 of their Wukongs to produce a Celestial Twin. Once that happens, the other Wukong Celestial Twin options are grayed out, so that's going to be out of the question. But the twin will basically last forever until the host returns to their orbiter, so you can actually jump back to the dry dock and start another mission with the Celestial Twin that is still active. But at that point, you still undergo the same logic of only having 1 extra Celestial Twin at any given point in time. As far as I can tell, the twin still uses the same weapon mods that are equipped to the player, so they should be still doing a pretty decent amount of damage, especially when it comes to using something like the Iron Staff. So that's pretty much it. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. Which Warframes would you prefer to use as part of the Raojack in order to use their abilities as part of the Raojack? Let me know in the comments. Again, if your Warframe of choice is not in this list, it's not because they're bad. It's just that there are so many great options that I had to pick only 10 of them, and these are the 10 that I've decided to focus on for this video. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Raojack action, and until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye!